Okay, and it's recording. Okay. Just before we start off, I'm sorry if there's any background noise. I'm recording this from home as I'm on spring break. But let's just get started. My name's Joseph, as you would know. It's on the slide right there. This is for the INT315 Privacy and Civil Liberties um, presentation. So, of course, it'll focus on privacy and civil liberties in law enforcement intelligence. Intelligence operations are an important part of modern policing and national security, but they also raise some important questions about how citizens' rights are protected. In this presentation, I'll define key terms like intelligence, privacy, and civil liberties. I'll also discuss the core privacy principles of the National Strategy for Information Sharing, explain the legal framework of 28 CFR Part 23, and explore privacy concerns related to suspicious activity reports, intelligence fusion centers, and open source intelligence. And then I'll end off with a discussion on how agencies try to balance protecting public safety while also protecting the rights of individuals. So we'll start off with intelligence, as I think it's the biggest, it's just like the core part of everything. So intelligence is often misunderstood by a lot of people. They just think of it as just raw facts or, well, as we call it, information, raw information. But in reality, it's that information it's been collected after being collected is evaluated and analyzed to support decision making, because otherwise that raw information could be contradictory or just straight up useless to us. And according to Carter, a textbook, the intelligence is the product of a systematic process that transforms raw information into meaningful knowledge that can provide policy or operational decisions. In law enforcement, intelligence helps agencies identify crime patterns, assess threats, and allocate resources efficiently. For example, analysts may examine reports, surveillance information, and public data to identify patterns of criminal behavior. And once that information is analyzed and interpreted, it becomes, well, useful intelligence that law enforcement leaders can use to make decisions. Moving on to privacy. This refers to an individual's ability to control their personal information and to be free from unnecessary government intrusion. Privacy protections are essential in democratic societies because they protect people from excessive surveillance or misuse of personal data. I'm not going to be talking on privacy concerns in tyrannical places like, North Korea, because that's just not the focus of this presentation. It's talking about more the US centered. However, privacy becomes complicated intelligence work because agencies often collect a very large amount of information in order to identify potential threats. And the challenge here is determining how much information should be collected and how it should be stored or shared without violating the rights of individuals. Because, well, of course, they can collect every piece of information, but this would include recordings of your voice through your speaker, perhaps, and that's just a lot of people consider that way too far in cutting into our privacy. Now, I'll talk on civil liberties and civil rights. They're very similar and they are closely related, but they refer to different protections. Civil rights focus on ensuring individuals are treated equally under the law and protected from discrimination based on characteristics such as race, gender, or religion. I do know there are a couple amendments on this. I'm not going to talk on the specific amendments, but the U.S. has a long history on civil rights. For example, the civil rights movements of the 1960s with figures such as Malcolm X or MLK Jr. Um, it's just a very integral part of U.S. history. But civil liberties, on the other hand, refer to freedoms guaranteed by the Constitution, such as freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and protection from unreasonable searches and seizures. The First, the speech and religion part are the First Amendment. Very, very important. Think the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. These were created by our founding fathers to protect the American citizens from government overreach. Think a lot of these aren't as useful anymore. Of course, I'm not going to say they're bad, but I believe it's the Third Amendment, protecting from soldiers being able to arrest in your house. This was more a product of its time during the American Revolution. Isn't as useful anymore since it's just the American military has other places that it could rest than, of course, your house. In the context of intelligence operations, civil liberties are particularly important because intelligence collection often involves monitoring behavior and gathering information, sometimes conducting intense surveillance. So civil liberties help protect the American people from, say, the CIA just listening in on every phone call you have. Will they do it anyway? Probably. The CIA does a lot of bad things, but we're not here to talk about that right now. The national strategy for information sharing was developed to improve coordination between federal, state, and local agencies while protecting privacy and civil liberties. The strategy involves effective intelligence sharing. Sorry, the strategy recognizes that effective intelligence sharing is important for national security, but it also emphasizes that information must be handled responsibly. Um, Talking on this with, let me think. There are a couple databases. I'm not going to name them here, but there are many databases that collect information from many different agencies to help them find violent offenders. Like, say a crime is committed in, say, Cali, and a similar crime has been committed in New York. They could possibly take that information and try to find a common thread if it's just one culprit across multiple states. The strategy itself will outline several privacy principles, including transparency, accountability, accuracy of information, and strong safeguards to protect the sensitive data that's been collected. These principles are important because intelligence systems, again, as I said earlier, can collect large amounts of personal information, phone numbers, addresses, where you've been, where you've shopped, perhaps, what you spend your money on. Um, and without clear rules, there's a risk that information could be misused or innocent individuals could be incorrectly identified as threats. And by implementing strong privacy protections, agencies help maintain public trust and ensure that intelligence systems are used responsibly. Um, quick, quick side note. The CIA, I'm sorry, I'm talking about the CIA a lot. There's John Kiriakou has been showing up on my um news and For You page a lot. So I'll quickly side note on it. The CIA has done a lot of bad things and often ignores these, but it is important that we at least think the government is following these. And I do believe most agencies are, but it is important to note that these principles perhaps could be stronger, or there could be more oversight into these agencies. But again, that's not quite the focus of what we're talking about right now. Now, one of the most important regulations governing intelligence operations is 28 CFR Part 23. And this federal regulation establishes guidelines for how criminal intelligence information systems should operate. Key requirement being that the information can only be collected and stored if there is reasonable suspicion that the individual or organization involved is involved in criminal activity. That means you can't just like, I'll go over an example scenario in a bit. Sorry. This rule exists to prevent intelligence agencies from collecting information on individuals who are simply exercising their constitutional rights. Here's that example scenario. Imagine that an intelligence analyst receives information about a potential protest, a political protest group. Under 28 CFR Part 23, analysts must determine whether the group is actively involved in criminal activity. I mean, you can't just spy on their leaders, man, as if they're like national security threats. If the group is simply engaging in lawful protest or political expression, think no personal politics here, but think the political movements such as BLM or the No Kings movement. If the group is just engaging in their lawful ability to protest, like their dislike, like the No Kings movement, saying that we as Americans have a president and not a king. We don't have a tyrannical dictator. That is their opinion. The information intelligence systems cannot collect or store information about those people. This regulation helps prevent the misuse of these systems for political or ideological surveillance based on one's think of a further back movement like McCarthyism, where people who were suspected of being communists were heckled or investigated by federal agencies. Now, moving on to suspicious activity reports, I'll just refer to them as SARS from now on, usually. They're used by law enforcement to document behaviors that may indicate criminal or terrorist activity. And these reports are intended to identify potential threats before an incident occurs. For example, repeatedly sorry, photographing security checkpoints or attempting to access restricted areas may be considered as suspicious behavior. Think, think you have a person that is constantly visiting the outside of the Pentagon. Like you see him there, not a tourist, not someone who's like visiting and it's like, oh, there's the Pentagon over there. No, he's there often, every day of the week, for weeks at a time, perhaps. Or you would want to at least look into that person to make sure they aren't planning a bombing, perhaps, or an infiltration, just for to protect the lives of those working there. What's another good example? Let's see. Say someone is trying or repeatedly go tries to get through TSA with weapons in their bags. You would want to at least keep a monitor on that person to make sure they aren't trying to plan a political assassination. Now, SARs may be valuable tools, however, they can also raise many privacy concerns, as suspicious behavior isn't quite something so objective. Like, it isn't like saying the sky is blue. Like, if you see someone looking at a monument, looking at a government building, they could just be very curious, or there could be a path they often take. So it's very subjective, which means innocent actions, such as passing by a place many times, could be misinterpreted as threats. So to address these issues, agencies must review SARs carefully and ensure that reports are based on behaviors that are reasonably associated with criminal activity. Moving on. Talk about fusion centers. They were established after the 9/11 attacks to improve information sharing between federal, state, and local agencies. As that was a looking into it, there was many signs that could have pointed people that if that an attack was imminent, but the information just wasn't. Perhaps one agency had it, but this person in the other agency didn't have access to the information they needed because another agency's system had it. So it could have helped prevent the attack or at least mitigated it and saved many lives. So these centers bring together that information from different sources and allow analysts to identify these potential threats much more effectively and quickly. Now, these fusion centers have faced criticism in the past because, of course, the large information systems can sometimes collect data about individuals that just aren't involved in criminal activities. So, to address these concerns, many fusion centers now operate under strict privacy policies and oversight procedures to ensure that information is collected and used appropriately. Now, open source intelligence, or OSINT, OSINT, I'm not exactly sure how to say that. OSINT, I'll just keep rotating between that. Involves collecting information from publicly available sources, such as social media, news reports, and online databases. And although this information is publicly available, um, like anyone can just search up anyone else's Instagram account, Snapchat account. Of course, it could be on private, but the large scale monitoring of online activity can still raise concerns that you're being monitored too closely. And ultimately, intelligence operations must balance two important priorities. One is protecting the public, and two is protecting individual rights. And history has shown that intelligence systems can be misused if proper safeguards are not in place. But at the same time, effective intelligence has helped prevent criminal and terrorist activity. So finding a balance between the two, between security and liberty, remains a very, very important challenge in modern law enforcement. So, in conclusion, intelligence operations play an important role in protecting society from criminal and terrorist threats. However, these operations must operate within clear legal and ethical boundaries. And regulations such as 28 CFR per 23 and national privacy principles help ensure that intelligence systems respect privacy and civil liberties while still allowing agencies to protect public safety. Thank you.